All right, let's dive into what is the best diet for fat loss. Is it keto? Is it fasting? Is it paleo? Is it vegan? Is it carnivore? Or is it carb cycling? Well, the truth is, I don't know. Here we are. I own a high-end personal training studio, and I have worked with literally thousands of clients over the years. Yet my answer to you is, I don't know what the best diet for you is, and that's because I don't know which one you're willing to follow. So, if you want to be successful with any fat loss journey, the first rule is you have to be able to stick to your diet. So, if you're somebody that likes carbs, chances are keto is not going to work for you. If you're somebody that likes consistency, then carb cycling is not going to work for you either. So, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, where are you today? How did you get here? And most importantly, what are your preferences? So, I'm about to give you 3 simple steps to help you find the best diet for you and ultimately the one that will produce the most fat loss in both the short, but more importantly, the long term. Number 1 is attention to your intention, where intention is speaking specifically to your goals. You must clarify and fully understand what success looks like because being healthy is way too generic of a goal. So, to get a solid start, you need to ask yourself, where are you today? What goals do you have? What is your dietary history? And one of the most important is, how did you get here? And I think a lot of people, when they get themselves all worked up and ready to start a diet, they really start with the basic demographic questions like age, height, weight, all the typical things that you really need to calculate the basal metabolic rate. But the next step is, they usually sign up to a new gym or even buy new clothes. But what they don't ask themselves is, how did I get here in the first place and what caused me to start this fat loss journey? And really, where do you want to end up? For example, are you someone that has struggled with an eating disorder in the past? If so, bring awareness to that will really help bring understanding that you're about to step into a journey that could trigger any previous disordered tendencies. And without bringing awareness to that, it might not really work out too well in the end. Or are you someone that has a sport-specific goal? If that is you, then you might have to let go of any attachment to having abs, for example, because you might be performing better at your sport, being fueled at a higher calorie intake than what would allow to be shredded and ready to stand on a stage at a bodybuilding or figure competition. Right? Well, with another example, are you someone that wants nothing else in the world than to have abs, but you refuse to weigh your food? Then you're setting yourself up for failure because what we have a saying that says, what gets measured gets managed, right? So putting this in context, think about bodybuilders that get on stage in a Speedo or bikini in front of judges. Do you think that they don't weigh their food? Of course they do. They even dial in their water intake to the ounce. So if you want to have conditions on your goals, then you're also going to have to set your realistic expectations that you might not reach your goal because you put conditions on how you're going to get there that's going to restrict you on possibly even reaching that goal. And for those of you that say, I don't have a goal, well, how do you expect to find yourself in a place where you're happy and you're at a place where you want to be when you're telling yourself you don't have a goal? So how are you going to even get to that goal if you don't even have a goal? So step number 1, bring awareness to your intention. All right, number 2 is education. Yes, you do have to know the basics to how every single diet works. And there really are only 3 basic principles that any successful fat loss diet is really going to follow. All right, number 1, it's a big one. This diet puts you into a calorie deficit. I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. Number 2, you need to have adequate levels of protein intake. Number 3, you need to take into account your recovery, right? So if science tells you one thing, it's this, is that when it comes to fat loss, when you are in a calorie deficit and when protein intake is adequate, that it should not matter what the ratio of fats to carbohydrates are. Now that's great, and I love science, but I'm gonna tell you with over a decade of experience, the real key here is understanding recovery. So if you're somebody that is super stressed out, or if you're somebody that's doing lots of crazy intense exercise, things like CrossFit or powerlifting, I'm going to recommend that you have more carbs and less fats in your diet. Now, if you're somebody that doesn't do a lot of movement, or you're pretty sedentary, if you have someone that doesn't have a lot of stress, then you're probably going to do a lot better with slightly less carbohydrates and slightly more fats. But once again, the real key components are calorie deficit and protein intake. So specifically with calorie deficit, if you're somebody that is generally overeating or you generally have no issues around eating, the quick, easy way is head to some calorie predictor formula, type in your demographics, and we'll spit out a number for you. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Where the complicated part comes, for those individuals that have been chronically undereating for a while, what happens is, with those chronic undereaters, is that your metabolism is going to slow down to what you've been doing in the lifestyle you've been living for a while. So think about this, and I see it all the time. You did a 1,200 calorie fat loss diet last year, 2 years ago. It worked. You lost 15 pounds in 6-8 weeks. It was great. It was so great that you continued to do it. Yeah, you might have fallen off here and there, but generally speaking, you always fall back to this 1,200 calories. Except the difference is now it doesn't work. What's happening there? Well, science tells us you are not in a calorie deficit in relation to your metabolism. So what happens is, this is your calories, your food intake, this is your metabolism. As calories come down, this gap here is where we lose weight. What happens though is slowly our metabolism comes down to meet your caloric intake. And if we haven't prioritized any muscle building in the form of weight-bearing exercise and number 2, protein, we'll talk about in a second, then what happens is you're going to lose weight and lose muscle mass, and your metabolism is going to slow. So the good news is you can fix this. It might just take a little bit longer, and you're not going to just jump into a calorie deficit, because if this is what resonating with you, chances are it might be 800, 700 calories to get you into a calorie deficit. But not only is that unsafe, that's not recommended. That's just going to make any issues you're currently dealing with that much worse. Okay? So number 2, protein. So we want to prioritize protein, because protein is going to be a muscle-sparing macronutrient. What does that mean by that? Is when you're in a weight loss journey, you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight, good and bad. The idea is, if done properly, you're going to minimize the amount of muscle loss. And we do this by A, weight-bearing exercise, but number 2, more importantly, is eating an adequate amount of protein, okay? Which is fantastic. So the general rule, 1 gram per pound out the door should be good to go, unless you're one of the very, very, very few minority people that can't stand a lot of protein. And trust me, it is very uncommon for that person, for you to be that person. 1 gram per pound. And another reason why protein is fantastic is, metabolically speaking, our body burns more calories to break down a protein. That's right. So eat more protein, all right? And like I said, I spoke to the macro pairing already. It doesn't really matter what you want. Just go on what you like. If you have high intense exercise, eat more carbs. If you like carbs, eat more carbs, all right? As long as you control for protein and calories, study after study shown us over the decades that it doesn't really matter what you're eating as in relation to carbs or fats. So we've gone from awareness to education. Now the third thing I need to ask you is this. What are your desires? What are your non-negotiables? Do you need a date night? Do you need a night out with your friends? Do you need a night out with your significant other? Do you need to be eating meals with your children? Do you live up at the cottage every weekend? What does your life look like? Because at the end of the day, long-term dietary success is not about putting yourself into a diet, but rather modeling a diet around you and what your habits and preferences are. And when we understand this awareness, what got you here, when we have the appropriate education, we can take into account our individual desires. Only then can we build the appropriate application of your best fat loss diet. So hopefully these tips help you out. And don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, or if you're a private person and you don't want to leave a comment, if you have a question, reach out to me, hit up my DMs, and we'll go from there. All right, peace.